"I can't marry you, my family chose another," the millionaire said 2 years later. He found her with triplets and begged to hold them. Monroe Garrett's hands trembled as she stood in an upscale children's boutique 2 years later, watching a man she thought she'd never see again freeze across the aisle. 3 toddlers gripped her fingers, their slate blue eyes, identical to his, staring up at the stranger whose face had just gone completely white. "Mommy, who's that?" Piper asked, her voice cutting through the moment like a blade. "But we need to go back to where it all started falling apart. But before we go back to where it all began, I would love to welcome you, dear friends, to Mr. William Chronicles, where every story reminds us that the hardest choices often lead to the most beautiful redemptions. If you're new here, show some love and hit that subscribe button. Let me speak a blessing over you. May you never sacrifice your voice for survival, yet find the strength to do so when protecting those you love. May you build walls strong enough to guard your heart, but not so high that love can't climb them when it's truly transformed. And may you always know your worth, even when the world tries to price it with contracts and conditions. 2 years earlier, the Chicago skyline glittered behind Braden Ashworth as he stood on Monroe's penthouse terrace, his expensive suit doing nothing to hide the way his shoulders sagged under the weight of what he was about to say. The autumn wind whipped between them, cold and unforgiving, much like the words forming on his lips. "Monroe, I need to tell you something." His voice cracked. "And I need you to let me finish before you say anything." She'd known something was wrong the moment he texted asking to come over at 10 p.m. on a Wednesday. They'd been together for 18 months, secret, careful, waiting for the right moment to tell his family. But standing there in her oversized sweater, watching him struggle to meet her eyes, Monroe felt her stomach drop. "My parents have arranged my engagement." The words rushed out like he was ripping off a bandage. "To Natalie Pemberton. Her father's company is merging with ours, and the contracts were signed 3 weeks ago. Without this marriage, the deal falls through. Thousands of people lose their jobs. My mother made it clear. Choose duty or watch everything my family built crumble to dust." The terrace suddenly felt too small. Monroe gripped the railing, her knuckles white against the metal. "You're telling me this now, because the decision's already made." "I fought them." Braden stepped closer, desperation bleeding into every syllable. "I screamed. I threatened to walk away from everything. But my father pulled me aside and showed me the numbers. 8,000 employees, Monroe. Families with mortgages and kids in college and medical bills. All of it hangs on this merger. So you said yes." Her voice came out flat, emotionless, because if she let any feeling through, she'd shatter right there on her own terrace. "I said yes to them, because saying no meant destroying thousands of lives." His hand reached for hers, but she pulled away. "I came here to tell you that I would burn down my entire life to be with you, but they're holding the matches, and I don't know how to." "Stop." Monroe finally looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the truth written across his face. "You're not here to fight for us. You're here to apologize for already surrendering." The words hit him like a physical blow. Braden's jaw worked, searching for some defense, some explanation that would make this less devastating. But they both knew she was right. "I love you," he whispered. "That has to count for something. Love without courage is just a pretty lie we tell ourselves to feel less alone." Monroe's amber eyes held his, unflinching. "You kept us secret for 18 months because you were afraid of disappointing them. And now you're here, breaking my heart, because when they applied pressure, you folded exactly like I always feared you would." "Monroe, please. When's the wedding?" The question hung in the cold night air. Braden's silence answered before his mouth did. 6 weeks, he finally admitted. "The invitations are already printed." Something inside Monroe went perfectly still. Not numb. She'd deal with numb later. Right now, she needed him gone before she gave him the satisfaction of watching her completely fall apart. "I hope she makes you happy," Monroe said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I hope when you're standing at that altar, you remember this moment. Remember that you had a choice, and you chose the path that required the least amount of courage." She stepped back into her apartment, her hand on the glass door. Braden moved forward, panic finally breaking through his composure. "Wait, please, can we just—" Monroe closed the door. The soft click echoed like a gunshot. Through the glass, she watched him stand there, hand pressed against the barrier between them, mouth forming words she could no longer hear. She watched him for exactly 10 seconds before turning away, walking to her bedroom, and finally allowing herself to break. Braden remained on that terrace for another hour, waiting for her to come back, to give him another chance to explain or grovel or somehow fix what he'd just destroyed. But the door stayed closed. He finally left as the clock struck midnight, pulling out his phone to text her an apology that would go unread. Because by morning, Monroe Garrett would begin discovering that his betrayal had left her with far more than just a broken heart. If you've ever been betrayed by someone who chose comfort over courage, drop a comment and let me know. Would you have fought harder or walked away? Hit that like button and subscribe, because what happens next will leave you speechless. 3 weeks passed like walking through fog. Monroe functioned, but barely. She went to work at her marketing firm, smiled when required, and came home to cry in the shower where no one could hear. Her coworkers attributed her pallor to a bad flu. She let them believe it. The nausea started on a Tuesday morning. Monroe barely made it to the bathroom before her stomach emptied violently. She blamed it on grief, on the sleeping pills she'd been taking, on anything except the possibility creeping into the back of her mind like ice water through her veins. By Thursday, she couldn't button her jeans. By Saturday, she was bleeding from her nose for no reason at all. The clinic was sterile and impersonal, exactly what Monroe needed. She didn't want comfort. She wanted answers. The nurse took her blood pressure 3 times, frowning at the numbers. When Dr. Patterson finally entered, her expression made Monroe's chest tighten. "The pregnancy test is positive," Dr. Patterson said gently. "But there's more." Monroe's world tilted. "I'm sorry, what?" "You're pregnant. Based on the ultrasound, approximately 9 weeks." The doctor pulled up images on her screen. "But Ms. Garrett, we found something concerning. You're carrying triplets." The word didn't compute. Monroe stared at the grainy black and white image showing 3 distinct shapes, 3 separate heartbeats flickering like distant stars. That's not possible." "I was careful. We were always." "Triplets happen," Dr. Patterson interrupted softly. "But we need to discuss something serious. Your medical history shows a rare clotting disorder, factor V Leiden deficiency. Combined with a triplet pregnancy, this creates significant complications." Monroe watched the doctor's mouth move, heard words like life-threatening and catastrophic hemorrhage and specialized intervention, but her brain couldn't process them. She was pregnant, with 3 babies, Braden's babies, and, according to the doctor currently explaining survival rates, she might not live long enough to deliver them. Without aggressive treatment, the mortality rate for both mother and babies exceeds 70%. Dr. Patterson's clinical tone couldn't mask the gravity. "You'll need weekly transfusions, experimental medications, constant monitoring. The estimated cost is between $300,000 and $500,000. Monroe laughed. The sound came out harsh, bordering on hysterical. Her savings account had $4,200. Her insurance was basic, covering annual checkups and little else. She was going to die because she couldn't afford not to. "I need to make some calls," Monroe whispered, gathering her purse with shaking hands. She sat in her car for 20 minutes, phone clutched in her lap, trying to remember how to breathe. Finally, with trembling fingers, she pulled up Braden's contact. The phone rang once, twice. Someone picked up, but it wasn't his voice. Background noise flooded through the speaker, laughter, clinking champagne glasses, music that sounded expensive. A woman's voice, bright and tipsy, spoke directly into the phone. "Sorry, the groom's a little busy celebrating right now. Can we take a message?" The groom. His rehearsal dinner. Monroe ended the call so fast she nearly dropped the phone. He was getting married in days. He was toasting his future with another woman while Monroe sat in a clinic parking lot, dying and carrying his children, and he had moved on like she'd never mattered at all. She tried to call again an hour later, then 2 hours later. Each time, her finger hovered over his name before she pulled back. What would she even say? Congratulations on your wedding. Also, I'm pregnant with triplets, and we're all dying without $500,000. The foundation representative found her in the clinic waiting room the next afternoon. The woman was immaculate, tailored suit, expensive perfume, the kind of polished that came from generations of wealth. She sat down beside Monroe without asking permission. Ms. Garrett, my name is Helen Pritchard. I represent the Meridian Women's Health Foundation. We specialize in complicated pregnancies. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. We'd like to help you. Monroe should have questioned how this woman knew her name, knew about her diagnosis. But desperation makes people stupid. Help how? We'll cover everything. Every treatment, every medication, every specialist consultation. The emergency surgery when your body inevitably begins shutting down. Everything needed to save you and your babies. Helen pulled a document from her leather portfolio. In exchange, you'll sign a contract promising never to contact Braden Ashworth, never reveal the children's paternity, and never disrupt the life his family has chosen for him. The words hit like a sledgehammer. His family knew. They'd known about the pregnancy, and they'd sent someone to make her disappear. We've invested considerable resources ensuring Mr. Ashworth's marriage proceeds smoothly, Helen continued, her voice ice-cold. We won't tolerate complications. Monroe stared at the contract, at the blank line waiting for her signature. 3 babies were growing inside her. 3 lives that would die if she refused. Her hand shook as she picked up the pen. I need you to understand something, Helen said as Monroe signed her name. This contract is binding. Any attempt to contact him will result in legal action that will take your daughters away permanently. Monroe finished signing, sold her voice for her daughters' lives, hated herself for it even as she knew there was no other choice. The transfer to Lakeside Maternal Fetal Medicine Center happened within 48 hours. Monroe was moved by private medical transport to a facility that looked more like a luxury resort than a hospital, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking manicured gardens, equipment so advanced it seemed to belong in a science fiction film, and a team of specialists who treated her catastrophic pregnancy like a fascinating challenge rather than a death sentence. Her room had marble countertops and Egyptian cotton sheets. It made her feel like she was being kept comfortable while she died. The treatment started immediately. Weekly transfusions that left her weak and disoriented. Experimental medications that made her violently ill. She threw up, so often the nurses stopped looking surprised. Bed rest, so complete she spent hours staring at ceiling tiles, counting them obsessively because it was better than thinking about Braden cutting wedding cakes while she bled internally. Dr. Winters, the head of her medical team, explained each procedure in exhausting detail. Your body can't produce enough platelets to support 3 developing fetuses. We're essentially supplementing what your system can't provide while preventing catastrophic hemorrhage. Monroe nodded through explanations that felt like listening to someone describe her execution methods. She spent 4 months in that pristine prison. Meanwhile, 300 miles away, Braden Ashworth stood at an altar wearing a smile that felt carved from marble. Natalie Pemberton glided down the aisle in designer white, blonde and perfect and completely wrong. She looked at him with cool calculation rather than love, but that seemed appropriate for a marriage built on spreadsheets and merger agreements. The ceremony was everything his mother had orchestrated, photographers capturing every angle, champagne flowing endlessly, guests congratulating them with enthusiasm Braden couldn't return. When the officiant told him to kiss his bride, Natalie's lips were cold and tasted like expensive lipstick and obligation. Their honeymoon in the Maldives was 7 days of separate hotel rooms and conversations that never went deeper than discussing dinner reservations. Natalie spent most of the time on her phone, posting carefully curated photos that made their relationship look passionate, when the reality was a business arrangement neither of them pretended to enjoy. Back in their gifted mansion, separate wings, separate lives, Braden buried himself in work because the alternative was coming home to a wife who looked at him like he was a necessary inconvenience in her social climbing plans. He thought about Monroe every single day. Monroe's body began failing in her 6th month. She woke to alarm screaming, nurses flooding her room with controlled urgency that terrified her more than panic would have. Her blood pressure had spiked dangerously high. Internal bleeding. The baby's heart rate's dropping. "We need to deliver now," Dr. Winters announced, already scrubbing for emergency surgery. "Monroe, do you understand? We're out of time." She understood she was about to die. The anesthesiologist told her to count backward from 10. She made it to 7 before everything went dark. When Monroe woke 3 days later, weak and disoriented, a nurse was gently explaining that she had 3 daughters. Premature, fragile, fighting for every breath. They brought photos first because Monroe was too weak to be moved. Images of 3 tiny infants who looked more alien than human. Translucent skin stretched over bird bone frames, tubes covering more of them than was visible. Piper had been born first at 2 pounds, 4 ounces. Her slate blue eyes, Braden's eyes, already visible when they finally opened days later. Sloane came seconds after, 2 pounds, 6 ounces, with a surprising head of dark hair that shouldn't have developed yet. Jade was the smallest and most fragile at 1 pound, 15 ounces, stopping breathing so often that Monroe spent every NICU visit staring at monitors, waiting for alarms that indicated her youngest daughter had forgotten how to live. The weeks in the NICU were the longest of Monroe's existence. Every day brought new crises and small victories that felt massive when your daughters weighed less than bags of sugar. She healed slowly from surgeries that had saved her life but left her weak for months, her body demanding payment for being pushed past sustainable limits. Helen Pritchard visited once during this period, standing in Monroe's hospital room, delivering reminders about the contract with casual cruelty. "The Foundation has invested significant resources in your survival," Helen said, placing an envelope of cash on the bedside table. "Relocation expenses. And a reminder that any attempt to contact Mr. Ashworth will result in legal action that will take your daughters permanently." For months after delivery, Monroe was finally cleared to leave with 3 daughters, healthy enough for discharge. She moved to Minneapolis, where nobody knew her history, found a cramped 2-bedroom apartment that barely fit 4 people, and started rebuilding a life from devastation. Every piece of furniture was secondhand. Every baby supply was the cheapest version available. The foundation had covered medical costs, but not the ongoing expenses of raising triplets alone. Her days became endless cycles of feeding and changing and soothing. 3 babies needing attention on different schedules, ensuring she never slept more than 90-minute intervals for months. She built a freelance graphic design business from her laptop while nursing 1 baby and rocking another, creating marketing materials for small companies during the hours between nighttime feedings. Other women had partners who helped. Monroe had blank walls and an empty apartment and 3 daughters who would never know their father existed. She told herself she'd made the right choice. Protected Braden from impossible decisions. Protected her daughters from a father who'd chosen obligation over love. She believed this with desperate conviction, even on nights when exhaustion made her cry while her baby slept. 2 years passed in exhausting survival. And then everything changed in a children's boutique on an ordinary Thursday afternoon. Still watching? You're invested in this story. Show some love, hit that like button, and subscribe. We're just getting to the part where everything Monroe built is about to come crashing down. 2 years after leaving Chicago, Monroe Garrett had built something resembling stability through sheer determination and endless work. Her freelance design business had grown enough to cover rent and groceries, with a little left over for small luxuries like birthday cakes and shoes that actually fit. The Minneapolis apartment still felt cramped, but it was theirs, decorated with the girls' artwork and toys scattered across every surface, evidence of life being lived rather than merely survived. Piper had become curious and brilliant, asking questions that would stump most adults. Sloane was gentle and artistic, content to draw for hours while her sisters played loudly around her. Jade remained fierce and protective, the smallest but somehow the leader, defending her sisters from perceived threats like aggressive dogs at the park or children who played too rough. Thursday started like any other. Monroe wrestled 3 toddlers into matching dresses, a battle that took 40 minutes and required negotiation skills that would impress corporate lawyers. They needed outfits for their 3rd birthday party happening that weekend. "The blue dress is itchy," Jade announced, crossing her tiny arms with an expression of pure stubbornness that Monroe recognized as her own. "The blue dress is beautiful," Monroe countered. "And we're going to be late if you don't, Piper. Stop putting your shoes on the wrong feet." "They feel the same," Piper protested. Sloane just hummed to herself, already dressed and waiting patiently by the door like the angel she was. The boutique was upscale, the kind of place Monroe normally avoided, because the price tags made her chest tight. But the girls deserved something special for their birthday, and she'd saved enough to afford it without guilt. "Remember," Monroe said as they entered, "we look with our eyes, not our hands." The warning lasted approximately 30 seconds before Jade spotted a display of stuffed animals and made a beeline for them. Monroe was reaching for her youngest daughter when she felt it, that crawling sensation of being watched. She turned her head toward the shoe display and locked eyes with Braden Ashworth. Time fractured. The boutique sounds, children laughing, registers beeping, soft music playing, all faded into white noise. He stood 20 feet away, frozen mid-reach for a tiny shoe, his face cycling through emotions too fast to name. Recognition, shock, confusion. And then his gaze dropped to the 3 toddlers clustered around Monroe's legs. She watched the exact moment comprehension hit him. Piper looked up first, her slate blue eyes, his eyes, staring at the tall stranger with open curiosity. "Mommy, who's that?" Sloane turned next, those same distinctive eyes framed by dark lashes. Jade, ever protective, pressed closer to Monroe's leg, but her face bore the same unmistakable features. Braden's shopping bag slipped from his fingers and hit the floor. "Monroe," he whispered, the name coming out broken. Panic seized her chest. Monroe's hand found Jade's shoulder, her body instinctively positioning between Braden and her daughters. "Girls, stay close to Mama." But Braden was already moving, pushing past other shoppers with their complaints about his rudeness, not even registering. His eyes stayed locked on the triplets, drinking in details with an intensity that terrified Monroe because she could see him doing the math, their age, their features, the timeline that led to this impossible moment. "Monroe, wait please." His voice cracked as he closed the distance between them. "You need to leave." Monroe's voice came out harsher than she intended. "Right now. This isn't the time or place." "Are they?" He couldn't finish the question, but he didn't need to. Other shoppers were starting to stare. A mother pulled her own children away from what looked like a domestic dispute brewing. Monroe felt humiliation burn through her along with rage because he didn't get to show up after 2 years and demand explanations in front of an audience, while her daughters watched with frightened faces. "Who is that man?" Piper asked, her vocabulary advanced enough to sense tension. "Nobody," Monroe said firmly. "We're leaving. They have my eyes." Braden's words tumbled over each other in a desperate rush. "Monroe, please just tell me, are they mine? Where have you been? Why didn't you tell me you were pregnant?" The hypocrisy of his desperation made something snap inside her. He'd been so eloquent in the rain 2 years ago, explaining why he couldn't choose her, so rational about family obligations and business mergers. And now he wanted to act devastated that his choices had consequences. "You have no rights here," Monroe said, her voice cold enough to freeze. "No claims. No place in the life I built after you chose your family's approval over my existence." Braden reached toward the girls with a shaking hand, and Monroe moved faster. She scooped Jade up while keeping Piper and Sloane behind her, creating a human barrier between him and the daughters he'd just discovered. She watched him crumble in real time, his expensive suit suddenly looking rumpled, his face going through expressions of devastation that might have satisfied her if her children weren't watching this entire disaster unfold. "Please," he begged, actually begging, on the verge of tears in the middle of a boutique full of shocked customers. "Just let me. Can I know their names? Can I just touch their hands? I need to understand what happened, why you kept them from me, how you could go through pregnancy alone instead of—" "Their names are Piper, Sloane, and Jade," Monroe interrupted, saying each name like a weapon. "And you don't have to ask questions about choices I made after you walked away." She gathered her daughters and walked toward the exit, while Braden stood paralyzed among displays of children's clothes, looking like someone had reached into his chest and removed something vital. Monroe's hands shook so badly she could barely buckle the girls into their car seats. She drove home on autopilot while they chattered from the back, oblivious to the earthquake that had just restructured their universe. After getting them settled with snacks and cartoons, Monroe locked herself in the bathroom and threw up until nothing remained but dry heaves and terror. He knew. Braden Ashworth knew she had his daughters. The contract meant nothing now. There was no way to put that knowledge back in the bottle. Her phone started ringing within an hour. Numbers she didn't recognize lighting up the screen over and over. She blocked each one as it appeared, but they kept coming. Different area codes, different tactics. His desperation reaching through technology to batter at her carefully constructed walls. The doorbell rang while she was making dinner. Monroe's heart stopped. She looked through the peephole and saw him standing in her hallway, looking wrecked. Hair disheveled like he'd been running his hands through it repeatedly. Face pale with an expression that might have moved her if she wasn't so terrified of what his sudden reappearance meant. She didn't open the door, but she didn't hide either. Just stood there staring at this man who'd broken her heart and now threatened to shatter her entire world. The girls called from the living room, asking who was at the door. Braden's head jerked up at their voices, his hand pressing against her door like he could reach through wood to touch what he'd just discovered. Monroe stood frozen, watching through the peephole as he finally slid down to sit with his back against her door, clearly planning to wait however long it took. Braden sat in Monroe's hallway until midnight. Inside the apartment, Monroe went through the motions of normal life, feeding her daughters dinner, giving them baths, reading bedtime stories, all while acutely aware that their father was on the other side of her door like some kind of high-end stalker refusing to leave. After the girls finally fell asleep, she stood in her kitchen for an hour, staring at that closed door, weighing options that all ended with her life being torn apart by a man who'd already proven he'd choose duty over everything else. The problem was seeing him had resurrected feelings she'd buried under years of survival, had reminded her that once she'd loved him enough to disappear rather than complicate his perfectly planned future. The problem was her daughters deserved to know their father, even if his timing was catastrophic. The problem was Braden looked like someone who'd just discovered he'd lost something irreplaceable and was determined to fix it, even though some things stayed broken no matter how much money or desperation you threw at them. Monroe unlocked her door at 12:47 a.m. Braden's head jerked up from where he'd been half asleep against her doorframe, his eyes meeting hers with something raw and desperate that made her weak even though she should have been strong enough to send him away. She stepped aside without speaking. He stood slowly, like sudden movements would make her change her mind, and followed her into the tiny apartment that was probably smaller than his walk-in closet. They ended up in her kitchen, the only place far enough from the girls' bedroom to talk without waking them. Monroe made coffee because her hands needed something to do that wasn't reaching for him or hitting him. She hadn't decided which. "Talk," she said finally, sliding a mug across the table. "I tried to find you." His voice was hoarse. "I hired investigators the week after my wedding. They searched for months and came back with nothing. You vanished completely. That was the point." "Why?" The word came out broken. "Why didn't you tell me you were pregnant?" "I would have." "You would have what?" Monroe interrupted, anger finally breaking through her careful control. "Canceled your wedding? Destroyed the merger? Disappointed your family? You already made it clear what you'd choose when pressure was applied." Braden flinched, but didn't look away. "Tell me what happened." "All of it, please." So Monroe told him about the diagnosis 3 weeks after he left, the triplet pregnancy combined with a clotting disorder that made survival unlikely without treatment costing hundreds of thousands of dollars. About trying to call him during his rehearsal dinner and hearing a woman's voice mention the groom's celebration. She watched his face drain of color as he remembered that night, drunk on champagne and despair, phone turned off because he couldn't handle talking to anyone who might give him an excuse to run. "I tried calling you," Monroe continued, her voice stripped of emotion. Multiple times. But you were busy celebrating your future while I was in a clinic being told I was dying. God, Monroe, I'm not finished. She pulled the contract from her kitchen drawer and slid it across the table. This is what your family did when they found out. Braden read the document, his hands shaking as he absorbed language clearly designed by lawyers his mother had hired. The foundation name, the terms demanding Monroe's silence, the authorization section referencing an account Constance Ashworth controlled. My mother knew. His voice came out flat, shock rendering him almost emotionless. She knew you were pregnant, and she paid you to disappear. She paid to keep me alive, Monroe corrected, in exchange for making sure you never found out you were going to be a father. Braden stood so fast his chair crashed over. His hands curled into fists, rage radiating off him in waves that had nowhere to go because the person responsible was his mother, and he'd been raised to respect her even though, right now, he wanted to scream until his voice gave out. Monroe flinched at his sudden movement, and he forced himself to breathe, to stay calm, to not become one more man towering over her in anger, even though the anger wasn't directed at her. He picked up his chair with careful movements and sat back down, pressing his palms flat against the table to keep from putting his fist through a wall. Tell me the rest, he said quietly. What happened after you signed? Monroe described the pregnancy in fragments that didn't convey the actual horror. Months of hospital beds and transfusions and medications that made her violently ill while her body slowly failed. The emergency delivery when her system finally gave out. Extensive time in intensive care with premature daughters who stopped breathing multiple times. She showed him photos on her phone from those early days. Tiny infants covered in tubes who looked too small to possibly survive. Braden stared at images of his daughters fighting for life, while he'd been completely unaware they existed, and something inside him broke that would never fully heal. I need to make a call, he said, pulling out his phone. Within 20 minutes, a private investigation firm had new instructions. Document everything about the Meridian Foundation's connections to Constance Ashworth. Find proof. Build a case that would be undeniable. What are you doing? Monroe asked. Getting answers. And making sure my mother understands there are consequences for what she did. His jaw tightened. To all of us. The investigators worked fast. By morning, they confirmed Constance had hired private firms to track Monroe after the breakup, received reports about the pregnancy within weeks of the diagnosis, and personally arranged for the foundation contact and contract terms designed to ensure Braden never found out. Braden left Monroe's apartment as the sun rose, his mind racing with plans to dismantle his mother's control while somehow proving to Monroe that he'd changed. The next weeks became a careful dance. Braden appeared at Monroe's apartment every morning with coffee and bagels, not demanding entry, but offering presents. Standing in her hallway until she opened the door with exasperation and let him share breakfast with daughters who were slowly warming to his consistent attention. Piper accepted him first with the pragmatic calculation of a child who recognized adults, who actually listened when she talked. She started showing him her drawings, explaining elaborate stories behind crayon scribbles. Sloan followed more cautiously, testing his commitment with endless questions. Where were you before? Why didn't you come sooner? Are you going to leave again? Each question gutted him, but he answered with honesty appropriate for young children trying to understand adult failures. Jade remained fiercely skeptical, her protective instincts making her suspicious of this stranger wanting to be called daddy when they'd managed fine without him. The breakthrough came when Jade's beloved stuffed elephant lost an ear during rough play. Her devastation was so complete that Monroe couldn't console her. Braden asked if he could try, spending an hour carefully sewing the ear back on with thread that didn't quite match but held firm. He returned it to Jade with the solemnity of someone handling crown jewels. She stared at him with slate blue eyes identical to his own, then wrapped her small arms around his neck in a hug that lasted 3 seconds but meant everything. Monroe watched from the doorway with an expression he couldn't read. Gratitude and grief that he was finally being the father these girls deserved, but had done so far too late. Meanwhile, Braden methodically restructured his entire existence. He filed for divorce from Natalie, whose affair with his business rival had been ongoing since before their wedding. He removed his mother from positions of real authority in Ashworth Technologies, stripping Constance of power while maintaining ceremonial titles. And late at night, after the girls were asleep, he sat at Monroe's kitchen table while she worked on design projects, not talking much but present in a way he hadn't been allowed to be during her pregnancy. She maintained careful distance, treating him like a necessary coworker rather than someone she'd once loved. But sometimes he caught her looking at him with an expression that suggested maybe underneath all that protective armor was a woman still capable of feeling something more than resignation. You've made it this far into Monroe's story. Monroe's walls are cracking, Braden's fighting for his family, and a confrontation with his mother is coming. Comment below. Can you forgive someone who destroyed years of your life? Show some love by hitting that subscribe button and dropping a like on this video. The next chapter is going to be explosive. 3 months after the boutique collision, Braden called Monroe with a request that made her stomach knot. "I want you and the girls to come with me to my mother's estate," he said carefully. "It's time she faced what she did, and I need you there when it happens." Monroe's first instinct was refusal. The idea of walking into Constance Ashworth's territory, where she'd always been viewed as unsuitable, a distraction from Braden's proper trajectory, made her skin crawl. But her daughters deserved a grandmother, even one who'd tried to erase their existence. And Braden deserved to see her stand beside him while he confronted the woman who'd orchestrated this nightmare. "Okay," Monroe agreed, "but we do this on my terms." They arrived on a Saturday morning when spring had turned the estate gardens into something from a storybook. The girls ran ahead, excited about the big house and vast yards, oblivious to the tension radiating from both adults. Constance answered the door, expecting a private conversation. Her practiced politeness shattered into genuine shock when she saw Monroe accompanied by 3 toddlers who were unmistakably Ashworth blood. Those distinctive slate-blue eyes staring out from little faces that mixed Monroe's beauty with Braden's features. "Mother," Braden said coldly, "I believe you know Monroe. And these are your granddaughters, Piper, Sloane, and Jade." Constance's composure recovered quickly. Decades of navigating high society had trained her well. But Monroe saw the moment she truly looked at the triplets, saw the recognition flash across her face, saw something that might have been regret before the sophisticated mask slid back into place. "Please come in," Constance said, her voice tight. The formal living room felt like a museum, expensive and untouchable. The girls immediately gravitated toward the windows overlooking gardens, their excited chatter the only warm sound in the cold space. Braden didn't waste time on pleasantries. He laid out evidence on his mother's coffee table. Each investigator report another nail in the coffin of their relationship as he'd always known it. Documented proof of how Constance had tracked Monroe, learned about the pregnancy, and arranged for the foundation's contract. "You knew," Braden said, his voice carrying the weight of betrayal. "You knew I had children, and you paid their mother to disappear." Constance's first defense was justification, delivered in the rational tone she'd always used for unpleasant necessities. "I was protecting the family. The merger with the Pembertons was critical. Thousands of jobs depended on." "Don't." Braden's interruption cut like a blade. "Don't you dare justify what you did by talking about jobs and legacy. You stole years of my daughters' lives because you decided their mother wasn't suitable for the Ashworth name." Monroe had remained silent, holding Jade while Piper and Sloane flanked her on the sofa. But when Constance tried again to emphasize the excellent medical care she'd ensured Monroe received, Monroe finally spoke. "Do you understand the difference between offering help and demanding silence as payment for survival?" Her voice was quiet but carried through the room with force that made Constance actually flinch. "You turned a medical crisis into leverage. You treated my pregnancy like a problem to be solved with money rather than 3 human lives who deserved their father." Piper, sensing tension she didn't fully understand, asked in her clear voice, "Why does Grandma look so mean?" The question hit Constance visibly. Her perfect composure cracked as she realized her granddaughters saw her as a villain, that her first impression on them was happening during a confrontation about how she tried to erase their existence. Braden delivered his ultimatum with the finality of someone who'd spent months preparing for this moment. You have one chance to begin repairing the damage you caused. You apologize sincerely to Monroe and take full accountability without justification. You respect Monroe as the mother of your grandchildren and begin earning forgiveness through years of changed behavior. You establish a relationship with Piper, Sloan, and Jade based on genuine affection rather than social obligation. He paused, his voice dropping to something dangerous. Or you remain permanently cut off from the family I'm building. You never meet your granddaughters. You never become part of their lives. Because I will not allow anyone to treat Monroe as less than she deserves, regardless of their relationship to me. Constance's breakdown was gradual, then complete. The sophisticated mask she'd worn for decades crumbled under consequences she'd never anticipated. Through tears Monroe had never imagined this woman capable of shedding. Constance offered an apology that was insufficient but genuine. I was wrong, she whispered. I thought I was protecting my family, but I destroyed everything I claimed to value. I treated you cruelly, Monroe. I stole something irreplaceable from all of you because I valued control over connection. I'm so deeply sorry. Monroe listened without visible reaction, her face carefully neutral. When Constance finished, Monroe's response was measured and firm. Trust is earned over time through changed actions, not words. I'll allow supervised visits with the girls because they deserve to know their grandmother. But boundaries will remain strict. Any attempt to manipulate or control our family, again, will result in permanent separation, regardless of blood relationships. Constance accepted these terms with humility Monroe had never associated with her. The meeting ended with tentative agreements and clear boundaries, supervised visits, limited authority, forgiveness that would require years of proving through actions rather than promises. 6 weeks later, Braden arranged what he told Monroe would be a final conversation about establishing permanent terms for Constance's involvement. She agreed, bringing the girls along for what she assumed would be another difficult but necessary discussion. The estate gardens had been decorated with flowers too elaborate to be coincidental. Understanding hit Monroe with force when she saw the gazebo draped in white blooms. He'd planned this. The girls appeared from different garden paths like they'd been positioned deliberately, running toward the gazebo with Constance trailing behind, wearing an expression that suggested she knew what was coming. Braden took both of Monroe's hands, and in front of their daughters and his mother, who tried so hard to prevent this exact scenario, he dropped to one knee on precisely manicured grass. Monroe, I'm not asking you to forget what I did or pretend the past wasn't devastating. I'm not offering you wealth or status or any of the things my family has always valued. His voice was steady despite the emotion in his eyes. I'm promising partnership, devotion to building a future that honors what we survived, even though we survived it apart. I want to marry you properly this time, with our daughters as witnesses, without parents dictating terms or contracts limiting love. Just two people who've been through hell and came out the other side, damaged but still capable of choosing hope over fear. He pulled a ring from his pocket. Simple band with 3 small stones representing their daughters. I understand if you need time, if you're never ready to trust me with your heart again. But I'm going to be here, regardless, present for every moment going forward, because I've already missed too much and I refuse to miss anything else. Monroe looked at this man who'd broken her heart, then spent months proving he'd changed. She thought about the contract she'd signed, the hell she'd endured alone, the walls she'd built to protect herself. She thought about watching him with their girls, his patience, his consistency, his genuine transformation from someone who'd let family dictate his future into someone who'd restructured his entire existence around being the father and partner he should have been from the beginning. Yes, she said, because forgiveness wasn't about forgetting, but about choosing love despite the scars. The ring slid onto her finger while 3 little girls cheered with enthusiasm that made everyone laugh through tears. Constance watched from a respectful distance, her own tears falling freely. The wedding happened 4 months later, intimate ceremony with people who actually mattered. Piper Sloane and Jade served as flower girls in dresses they'd chosen themselves after fierce debates about colors and styles. Monroe walked down the aisle toward Braden with their daughters flanking her, belonging to herself first and always. They exchanged vows about second chances and the family they'd created through pain and patience, about empires built not on wealth, but on the courage to choose love when the world said it was too complicated. The reception was loud and joyful, their daughters creating beautiful chaos that felt perfect for a family that had never been conventional, but had survived against impossible odds. Years passed with the speed that happens when life is full of meaning. The girls started school, thrived, became their own fierce individuals. Braden coached their soccer team despite knowing nothing about soccer. Monroe's business won awards that had nothing to do with her connection to wealth. Constance rebuilt relationships slowly, becoming Nana, who remembered preferences and showed up to school plays and never again tried to control outcomes. And Monroe and Braden built something beautiful from ruins. Proof that sometimes love survives, even when everything tries to destroy it. If this story touched your heart, if it made you believe in second chances and love that survives impossible odds, hit that like button. Share this with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to Mr. William Chronicles for more stories that move your soul. Drop a comment. What would your answer have been? Thank you for being part of this journey.